Coming in at number 5, we've got SCP-1548. Quick, name some enormous things. Elephants, office buildings, Mount Everest. Now, these are all good guesses. Yeah, they're big, but here's the deal. Pretty much everything on this list is going to dwarf something you could conceivably behold on Earth. And it's gonna be one of those. 1548 is known as the Hateful Star. Stars, as you might already know, are huge. Like our sun is one of the smaller varieties going around. Try to wrap your head around that for a moment. In fact, this star is more than just a star, it's multiple solar phenomena. There's SCP-1548-1, which is a series of sunspots, each 40,000 by 15,000 kilometers in size. About 23 hours after they appear, they converge, becoming one enormous solar prominence, taking the shape of thaumaturgic symbols. Then there are 1548-2 and 3, which are sunspots and symbols that form under different circumstances, but are usually pretty huge too. These occurrences cause a whole lot of insane stuff to happen, from inflicting intense psychological damage on people who behold them, to strengthening materials, to causing weapons affected by the symbol to annihilate stuff around their areas of effect. In fact, a recent event has caused irreversible changes to our solar system. A rapid recurrence of 1548-1 events has led to a dense cloud of ionizing radiation to form around our solar system, totally changing the night sky. The Foundation has started to disseminate information to keep the public calm, but the effects of this change in the sky have started to be noticed. Folks who witness certain things in the night sky have had their minds altered by the malice 1548 seems to emit, and powerful weapons have leveled large areas. There's something in there about a subset of folks known as Orthothans who seem to be waging some kind of war. The O5 Council has been voting on what to do for a while now, but I'm not exactly sure what's gonna happen next, so wish you the best of luck. Coming in at number 4, we've got SCP-3125. Now, if you want to read this one, you've got to know the code to get in. That's right, it's locked behind a keypad, and only those with a secret password are getting in. How do I know the password? Well, I'm special. You're not, but I'll give you a hint anyway. How many flavors in a standard roll of Lifesavers? How many guys at the burger joint that fries their fries in peanut oil? What's 7 minus 2? What's the smallest dollar bill in Canada? A number that rhymes with alive. Use that as you will. I've got plausible deniability if you guys break into the number pad without being allowed to be there. Enter at your own risk. This SCP is quite a mind boink, described as an extremely large, highly aggressive, metastasized meme complex. It started outside our reality and now it's right up in it. I always knew the rising popularity of memes would be the death of us all. It's adapted for survival in much harsher conditions than we can provide, and therefore humans don't really have any sort of defense against 3125. When someone's affected by it, they become incapable of entertaining weaker ideas. Their whole being is then devoted to the propagation of 3125. So this thing can spread fast through the ideas of our weaker minds. And just like propaganda, you're not immune to it. Nope, not even you. No, you're not special. As of right now, it's not entirely present in our reality. If it ever managed to manifest completely, the knowledge of it would spread throughout the world very quickly, likely ending anybody's ability to do anything about it in less than 12 hours. Even now, folks who learn about it end up dead very quickly. The worst part is, most folks who are infected, and therefore are infectious, don't really know it, or they can't conceive of knowing it. Once 3125 makes its way into someone's mind, they forget about it and they don't even notice it. It uses some sort of brain-altering thing to make sure that nobody's aware of it. The way the Foundation describes it is like the stuff mosquitoes use to prevent you from noticing that they're sucking your blood. But instead of your blood, they're like taking over your brain, and it's not itchy, it's just gonna kill you. Right now, there's no real way to fight it. A scientist suggested creating an irreality amplifier, but that would require the folks building it to understand what they were building, and then they would have to know about the meme, and then they'd get infected by it. So let's just hope that the Foundation keeps it in check indefinitely, because if this gigantic mass of memetic information makes its way into our reality, we're toast. Coming in at number 3, we've got SCP-1682. Sunworms! Hell yeah, I feel like that's good enough of a description. I don't need to say anything else, just sunworms. Okay, I guess I should explain the whole thing. See, these are large, segmented, worm-like entities that exist in the sun. The good folks over at the Foundation have estimated that the one that we've designated 1682 is over 28,000 kilometers long. It appears to dive and loop for long periods of time, often roaming the surface of the photosphere for 3 to 4 months before diving down and disappearing for 4 to 8 months. The people investigating it believed it to be a permanent fixture at that point, but one day it up and fired its way across the galaxy. It emerged from the photosphere at a speed of 1045.5 kilometers per second and was last sighted passing Pluto. Now, get this. Some folks are calling it a solar tapeworm. That's right, it lives in the bowels of the sun until it's sapped enough energy and then heads off on its merry way. It's an image I didn't need. Coming in at number 2, we've got SCP-2859. This one literally mirrors an entire quadrant of the solar system, so if that's not big, I don't know what to tell you. Try not to feel too dwarfed in its shadow, you know, we're all tiny specks of insignificant nothing if you really think about it. So isn't that a little bit comforting? No? Not to you? Okay, well, on with the explanation anyway. It will manifest in enclosed, unused space, eventually breaching the object encapsulating it. Expeditions inside have shown that celestial objects do indeed exist within it in the precise locations that they would be otherwise. It also tends to pull anything that makes contact with its threshold in. Otherwise, it doesn't really affect the area around it, it just kind of is there. It's weird and potentially micro-radiation inducing, but not terrible in of itself. But there is a giant species of giant serpentine predators around 80,000 kilometers in length that do seem to follow this anomaly wherever it goes. And anything that it pulls in, they will consume. So that's not good. Instances of 2859 have been spotted dangerously close to Earth too, so you better keep an eye out. And finally at number 1 we've got SCP-3200. Get this, we've made some claims about enormous stuff in this video, but this SCP is literally light years in diameter. 300 million light years to be precise. That is a big anomaly. It's expanding by about 1 million light years per year too. This void could potentially collapse the universe. That's how huge it is. If it were 2009, it would be a great source for run-ups to Yo Mama jokes. However, because we've moved past that as a society, I'll avoid stooping that low. Suffice it to say, this is one gigantic SCP. The exact properties of this thing are currently unknown too. It was discovered by civilian scientists, and the folks who investigated it most closely ran into some issues. The Peregrine expedition took some experimental tech and ran with it, hoping to find something useful within the SCP-3200 void. Taking advantage of temporal sinks, the crew was able to travel into the heart of the anomaly in a relatively short period of time. They arrived in the void and saw nothing but blackness. No stars, no galaxies, true void action. Eventually, a box showed up, surprising the crew. Inside was a CD containing a video of the captain talking to camera. He claimed they'd been trying to slow the anomaly's growth to little success, which disturbed the crew. Over time, reality began to act different, and even more different than they expected going in. They also managed to amass quite the collection of footage of the captain speaking about the anomaly. None of these elaborated on what the anomaly was actually doing though. Eventually, tragically, they got to the source of the matter. After witnessing thousands of different iterations of himself investigate the void over a period of what could be thousands of years, it became clear to the captain that space-time was torn and had been rending itself apart. The things they've seen are echoes of different timelines, produced, consumed, and repurposed by the Abyss. There's no way to fix it, although each iteration of the crew does their best. It's growing larger, consuming more, and yet there is nothing we can do about it. In the last words of Captain Kuznetsov, we've seen into the abyss, and by God, it hates us. Yikes. Bet you didn't expect things to get that unimaginably big. You were probably thinking like Godzilla-sized anomalies when you came in. Not today, we are going to strain the limits of your imagination. How fun.
Number 5, Dagon and the Deep Ones. Coming up first on our list is a multifaceted entry with Dagon and the Deep Ones who worship him. They kinda go together. What is a Deep One? It's not a sea monster that went to first year philosophy and is always trying to wax poetic, but rather a Deep One refers to a race of amphibious, humanoid-like ish sea creatures, closely resembling creatures like frogs or axolotls. If you've ever seen Hellboy's Abe Sapien or the monster from Shape of Water, those monsters are actually a pretty good representation for what a Deep One should look like. Deep Ones get their name from their homes, deep beneath the sea, obviously, where they live out their cold, often miserable lives. When Deep Ones do venture to the surface, they do so to sweep humans under their influence, promising them riches in exchange for worship, sometimes even mating with them, creating disgusting hybrid Deep Ones. And first and foremost, to ingratiate them into the cult of Dagon, worshipping their master, Dagon, a massive Deep One of fantastic power. Dagon appears in the short story appropriately named Dagon, which is also a great jumping on point if you've ever been curious about reading H.P. Lovecraft and you didn't know where to start. It's one of the first appearances of any of the Lovecraft monsters at all. Dagon is worshipped by humans and Deep Ones in equal measure, no doubt thanks to his influence. Dagon is immortal, massive, and commands a lot of respect. It's unknown what the full extent of Dagon's power is, but given that he's an immortal sea monster with dominion over a race of pelagic nightmares that do his every bidding, let's assume that if he really wanted to stir up trouble, it would not be that difficult for him. Just ask the town of Innsmouth how they feel about their master. They've got nothing but positive things to say, I'm sure. And hey, while I got you here, if you're liking what we do, we'd always appreciate a subscribe our way, and you'll catch the best horror videos in your inbox every single day. Number 4, the Shoggoths. A Shoggoth or a Shoggoth, I'm really not sure, which does sound a bit like something a 1920s chimney sweep might yell at you to get off. Hey, Shoggoth! Is a disgusting, writhing mess of iridescent black slime and a sea of eyeballs engineered by the Elder Things to function as a race of tools for their will, as they're mostly used for undersea construction. They're amorphous, shape-shifting monstrosities, able to mock and reflect all matter of organ and life. A Shoggoth is capable of molding itself however it needs to see fit to accomplish its dark dealings, which make them the perfect tools for the Elder Things. Now, the first generation of Shoggoths were brainless husks, solely driven to appease their masters. But over the eons of their existence, the Shoggoths began to mutate and develop a low form of consciousness, eventually rising up and overthrowing the Elder Things altogether and working for themselves to build their own cities, where they now reside in their city in Antarctica, poorly imitating their old masters, shrieking Tikali over and over, an old rallying cry the Elder Things would shout at the Shoggoths to get them to work. Poor little amorphous shape-shifting monstrosities. Now, although a Shoggoth was intended to serve mostly as a being for construction, they're not without their abilities. A Shoggoth is hulkingly strong, capable of crushing a human in seconds, and they're known for using their brute strength to solve problems in their way. For example, the Shoggoth that makes an appearance in the Mountains of Madness crushes an entire rookery of penguins that was in its way beneath its mighty weight. While the Shoggoths don't seem to have any higher goals or aspirations, they've shown themselves to be threatening enough that if crossed, you'll regret ever dismissing them as nothing more than tools. Number 3, Yuganollak. Yuganollak is colloquially known as the Defiler and is more properly known as the god of depravity and perversion, which is just about the worst way you can introduce yourself on a first date. Yuganollak isn't just into human perversions, oh no. This wretched great one has its sights set on something much bigger than anything our little human brains could conjure up. Yuganollak is after depravity on an incomprehensible scale. That's a word that gets thrown around a lot in the Lovecraft mythos, incomprehensible. Yuganollak's true form is unknown, as it seems to exist in a state outside of a physical body. But when it's looking to pursue some of its disgusting pleasures, it always acquires a human host. And when it takes a human host, it warps its body into a wretched, grotesquely obese form, lacking a head or a neck, and featuring a mouth in the palm of both hands. And I cannot imagine that it is getting up to anything good with those palms. Yuganollak is unlike most other great ones in that it's capable of directly speaking to humans in plain old English instead of indecipherable guttural noises. Its ability to speak English and communicate is what helps it to pursue its dark goals, as it seeks out humans who read perverse and forbidden literature, and it doesn't just hunt 50 Shades of Grey fans. It plants seeds of interest in human minds to research and eventually manipulating curious enough humans to read from the Revelation of Glocki, a cursed book containing Yuganollak's name. When read, it will be summoned. When Yuganollak is summoned, it makes its guests an offer, offering to make the summoner into a priest of Yuganollak, welcoming them into its service. It's best to accept this gracious offer, as a rejection will offend Yuganollak deeply, leading to the summoner to become its next meal. Unfortunate for you, but either way, Yuganollak is very pleased with the outcome. Either it gets a new servant for its life, or it gets a nice little midday snack. Number 2, Nyarlathotep. Now, Nyarlathotep is one of the most sinister entities in all of the Lovecraft pantheon, and one of the most popular beings as well, appearing across several stories in the universe, both by Lovecraft and other authors over the years. Nyarlathotep first appears in the short story, Nyarlathotep, which is also another great jumping on point for new Lovecraft fans who want to get into the lore somewhere and don't know where to start. It's pretty self-contained. Nyarlathotep is unique in the pantheon for several reasons, but first and foremost is its freedom. Nyarlathotep isn't trapped under the sea or in the stars like Cthulhu or Azathoth, but rather enjoys the freedom of the earth as it wanders. It usually likes taking the form of a man, wandering as a tall, joyous, friendly man, all the better for it to influence people with. It's said that Nyarlathotep has thousands upon thousands of forms and manifestations, and we can probably safely assume that most of them are horrifying and sanity destroying. Nyarlathotep could actually be described as the most human-like of any of the elder gods, which makes it all the more threatening. It's able to sway humans easily, gathering cults of personality around it. The original short story in which it appears, Nyarlathotep is gaining influence over the populations by wandering the world, performing incredible miracles, claiming to have lived for 27 centuries, winning over the hearts and minds of legions of followers willing to devote themselves completely for Nyarlathotep's will. Now, Nyarlathotep seems to take a sickening pleasure in driving humans to madness. For Nyarlathotep, death isn't the end game, but manipulating and twisting humans, driving them to insanity, that's the thrill. I guess it gets pretty boring being an unending, unstoppable power beyond the stars. You gotta find something to keep the day exciting, right? Merely being around Nyarlathotep is enough to make a man sick. Nyarlathotep isn't the absolute most powerful entity in the mythos, but it is definitely one of the most nefarious and threatening. Number 1, Sothoth. Oh, it doesn't even feel good saying that coming out of the throat. I shouldn't be talking about stuff like this. This is above my pay grade. Sothoth is a horrifying, unfathomably powerful god, and one of the most powerful gods in the whole mythos. If there's one big takeaway from H.P. Lovecraft's mythos, it's that there's always bigger fish up the food chain. We are so insignificant compared to everything else in the cosmos, but we think ourselves so important. We, the beastly fools of mankind, are dwarfed by the radiant greatness of Cthulhu, but Cthulhu himself is dwarfed by creatures like Sothoth. Sothoth, or Yagi as his close friends like to call him, is the embodiment of all time and space across the multiverse. Sothoth, like most gods in the Lovecraft pantheon, is an indescribable horror beyond human comprehension, and like Nyarlathotep, is known to be able to manifest and take several avatars to better serve its needs. But its most common form is described as that of being a massive, fractally glowing green orbs that continuously merge, separate, and regrow in an unending, spiraling sea of tentacles, tendrils, and eyes. Sothoth sees all. As the manifestation of time and space across the multiverse, there is nothing that can escape its gaze. It's wise to the entirety of all knowledge. It tempts humans by offering to impart that knowledge to those foolish enough to try and take advantage of that offer, who'll then have their lives utterly destroyed by madness after seeking its favor. The mere sight of Sothoth in its natural form is enough to destroy the human brain irreparably. Now, Sothoth's goals are just utterly beyond our understanding. It can't even be truly said that Sothoth is evil in the manner we understand. Our ideas of morality and good and evil just wouldn't register to a being like this. We're just too small to even begin to comprehend the horrors of the multiverse. And it's best we don't, because the more you try to study something like this, the more your obsession grows, and the more you seal your own fate.
Number 5, the Lernean Hydra. I'm no Hercules per se. Yeah, nothing. But thankfully, actually, because those are pretty big shoes to fill. Because that dude had to be brave beyond just like deep breaths and good pep talks. Guy had to literally fight like a 10-story condo building. How does one dude equipped with a club and a sword kill a 10-story building with teeth and 3 heads? Well, 5 heads. Well, 10 heads. Depending on how many you cut off, I guess. I guess that's why his name will be remembered and mine will be lost at sea. I guess he was a demigod, half powerful, half regular. A little unfair. By the way, which Hercules did you grow up on? I grew up on the Disney version, and Kevin Sorbo. Ugh, what a hunk. But there's been a lot, including the ancient real guy. She's known as simply the Hydra. As a serpentine water monster in Greek and Roman mythology, it's terrifying. Its lair was at the Lake of Lerna, also known to be the entrance of the underworld. Yikes. In the myth, the monster is killed by Hercules, as the second of his 12 labors. Okay, so this guy did it and then went on to go and do like 10 more. 10-0. Like, how hard can it be, right? I mean, it does have multiple heads. Yeah, it does have that. Also, apparently has poisonous breath and blood so violent that its scent is even deadly. Later versions of the Hydra story added regeneration to the monster's abilities too, so it can just start growing heads back at will. For every head chopped off, the Hydra would regrow 2 heads. So every time the Meg bites a head, 2 more. Another 2 are growing. Yeah, good thing this thing was hungry and swallows whales whole, because that's gonna be a lot of protein. Number 4, Jormungandr. Keeping it in the mythology department, we head up a little north. Jormungandr, aka huge monster, also known as the Midgard serpent or the world serpent. It is a sea serpent and the middle child of Loki and giantess Angrboda. And those middle children, huh? Always the problem kids. I would know. I am one. According to the prose Edda, Odin took Loki's 3 children by Angrboda, Fenrir, Hel, and Jormungandr, and tossed Jormungandr into the great ocean. The serpent grew so large that it was able to surround the entire earth and grasp it in its own tail, as it's referred to as, well, the world serpent. And apparently, when it releases its tail, Ragnarok will begin. Yeah, basically a destruction to the end of the world. Yeah, all this rich history is so heavy and gloomy, isn't it? Isn't there like a, the sun will shine like California for all to enjoy? Like, where's that written down? Nowhere, huh? Just cataclysms and monsters. Jormungandr's arch enemy is the thunder god Thor. And apparently a megalodon too. Cause let's face it, a giant serpent versus a 4-story great white, it would definitely be a good fight. I think if Thor showed up and started smashing up both, it would literally be the best Marvel Universe movie yet. Another encounter comes when Thor goes fishing with the giant Hymir. When Hymir refuses to provide Thor with bait, he strikes the head off Hymir's largest ox to use as his bait. Okay, easy, Roid Rage. Sheesh. They row to a point where Hymir fishes, he prepares his fishing line and a large hook and baits it with the ox head, which Jormungandr bites. Thor then yanks the serpent up from the water and the two throw hands. Okay, so it sounds like it isn't that big. I mean, it's huge, but the wrapping around the planet has got my dimensions off. Maybe it was like a metric versus imperial thing back then. I don't know, what do you think? Comment down below who would win, because when it gets into mystical powers and stuff, it becomes a little unfairly matched, no? Number 3, Cthulhu. Come on, we know this guy. Now this would be a good fight. This is sort of fathomable. Well, kinda. An extinct shark versus a made-up ender of worlds. Cool, let's do that. Basically a giant humanoid octopus dragon versus the Carcharasaurus megalodon, a triplex-size apex predator. It's definitely gonna be in Vegas and pay-per-view, I'll tell you that for free. Cthulhu is a fictional cosmic horror entity thought up by the twisted mind of cosmic horror writer H.P. Lovecraft. First introduced in his short story called The Call of Cthulhu, published by the American pulp magazine Weird Tales in 1928. He's like the first creature Lovecraft pondered up. He's terrifying. He's supposed to bring Armageddon upon us when he wakes up from the bottom of the ocean. Yeah, again, not all sunshine and rainbows with these stories. Actually, like, ever with these stories. Cthulhu is a great old one, almost the god of all gods in these stories. All these characters intertwine, and apparently he's our last call. Lovecraft depicts it as a gigantic entity worshipped by cultists in the shape of a green octopus dragon humanoid bipedal creature. And it's like 10 stories high. Yeah, like massive. Like us looking at toy army men. The Lovecraft universe, aka the Cthulhu mythos, its appearance alone is enough to haunt your dreams. Lovecraft describes this guy as a face full of octopus-like feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, sharp claws on its hands and feet, and of course, dragon's wings. So it can fly and swim. In other words, the worst thing you can imagine. Yeah. Cthulhu can fly, which he has on the Meg, for sure. And also, the mind control, I don't know how sharks' brains works, but Cthulhu gets in there, yeah, you're in trouble, Sharky. Number 2, the Leviathan. Okay, so we're diving into some very sacred texts now, the Bible. In said pieces of scripture, there's a tale of a giant creature that could swallow up cities, apparently, and is also an awesome roller coaster at Canada's Wonderland. Gotta try it if you haven't been on it yet. This twisty, turny, vicious monster was actually modeled after this twisty, turny, vicious monster, the Leviathan, the second of the great monsters described in the book of Job. This Leviathan is an absolute unit of a sea monster who's impervious to literally any human weapon. I mean, what were the weapons back then though? Like bows and arrows, swords maybe, little pokey things, you know? It's not gonna do much. Apparently locusts too, yeah, those are terrifying. This Leviathan breathes fire. It emits smoke from its nostrils, and it's related to another ancient monster called Lotan, a 7-headed giant serpent who's represented as pure chaos. I mean, what Bible creature isn't terrifying though? Was this giant sea snake a water dragon? Because apparently it's something like 300 miles long according to the Bible. So it's like Jormungandr territory, but longer. Maybe it's the same creature, told by 2 different peoples? Mind blown. Again, the Megalodon I think would just chomp this thing and dive deep down to the Twilight Zone and it's lights out. We've seen Jaws, right? Yeah, picture that but like 40 times the size. Yeah, we're gonna need a bigger boat. Number 1, Godzilla. I had to, obviously, we're having fun here today. Godzilla, yes, of course, the king of kings, aka kaiju, originates from a series of Japanese films. The character first appeared in the 1954 film Godzilla and became a worldwide pop culture icon ever since. Appearing in a ton of different media, 32 films, 4 American films, video games, novels, comic books, TV shows, you name it. Godzilla has been, like I said, the king of all monsters. Of course, a phrase first used in Godzilla, King of Monsters. Godzilla is enormous. It's destructive. It's a prehistoric sea monster awakened and empowered by nuclear radiation. With the nuclear incidents of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Lucky Dragon 5 incident, Godzilla doesn't really like nukes. Yeah. The amphibious reptilian monster is basically based around a concept of a dinosaur, erect, standing up, very tall. Of course, a bony plated back and tail, and let's not forget the special abilities Godzilla has as well. Atomic heat beams, or as I like to call it, stank breath. Dude had tonsil stones so bad, nuclear energy generates from them. Well, not really, but inside of his body using electromagnetic force to concentrate it into a laser radioactive beam. Amphibious, of course, so it swims and breathes underwater, which is gonna come in handy. Immune to conventional weapons and can regenerate. Yeah. And it's massive. Of course, Godzilla was said to average around 150 feet tall. In the American version, Godzilla is like 400 feet tall. Like, just a little bit bigger. This is kind of a no-brainer here, obviously, right? This little sunfish would have nothing on the king.
Coming in at number 5, we've got SCP-5320. You know when an inside joke goes a little too far and starts to alienate the folks around you? Yeah, well that's kinda what went on with this SCP, except the inside joke had to do with a fish that never seems to end and the weird cult that it spawned. When your top researchers are essentially posting and creating pointless rituals instead of doing their job, somebody's gotta step in. So even though this is a relatively harmless aquatic monster in and of itself, there are a lot of things that it could do to cause problems without ever leaving the comfort of the deep sea. As of right now, this creature is being described as an increasingly long snailfish, although no drones have ever been able to locate a head or tail. It's just all middle. The longer you look at it though, the worse things get. I'm talking about developing new obsessions and being more superstitious than ever. All because of an extra long fish, or as the folks associated with the Church of the Fish that just goes on forever like to call it, our merciful and long lord, or its glorious infinitude, hail its everlasting fish body. Additional side effects of viewing SCP-5320 include a heightened awareness of the passage of time, increased interest in ceiling tile number, and increased use of the phrase long boy in casual conversation, even when referring to things that are neither long nor a boy. Personnel monitoring SCP-5320 have reported feeling an unusual amount of excitement upon seeing one of SCP-5320's occasionally visible fins, as well as a compulsion to loudly cheer. This odd behavior concerning those who are all for the fish raised some red flags with the higher ups of the Foundation. They launched an investigation to see if anything info hazardous was actually going on, and the results are inconclusive at best. It seems that all this can be explained away by saying folks tend to get involved with silly superstitions and inside jokes, especially when they're working on something boring for an extended period of time. But it could also be that the fish is info hazardous and drawing more people under its influence by convincing anyone who looks at it that it's all just goofery. I'd keep a close eye on anyone involved with the Long Lord himself, and even those only tangentially related to it. Coming in at number 4, we've got SCP-1836. Be careful while roaming the seas, you never know what you could run into. And hell, there are a lot of things out there that have been around a lot longer than us and probably have more claim to the stuff that lives in the ocean. We, as modern humans, often believe we can just do what we want with no consequences. This, as we're finding out quite quickly, is not necessarily the case. Take SCP-1836 for example. An enormous iceberg located in the Cunningham Inlet, colored green and containing all sorts of anomalies. The green color actually doesn't have any anomalous properties, it's just trapped algae. But the rest of the stuff I mentioned, you better watch out. So there are 2 parts to note here. A mass of long extinct toothed cetaceans and a humanoid figure that hangs out in an open living room style cavern within the iceberg. Basically a bunch of dinosaur style dolphin ancestors and a goddess with super long hair. If you get sensed by the creatures of SCP-1836 and you are hunting or fishing in the area, they're coming to get ya. the iceberg will accelerate towards the creature being hunted, and said creature will somehow know to head towards the iceberg. When they get close enough to each other, the iceberg will get between the hunter and the hunted. At this point, all of these cetaceans will emerge from the berg and attack the hunting vessel. If nothing was killed by the time the iceberg arrives, the ship will simply be sunk. However, if the hunters were successful in taking down some prey, these ancient creatures will not be so generous. They'll snag anyone on board and pull them underwater, bringing them to caverns in the underside of the iceberg. Nobody who has suffered this fate has ever been heard from again. There's a lot more lore to this one concerning gods, haircuts, and shamans, but I'll leave that to you to explore. For now, we'll leave it at a magical moving iceberg full of ancient creatures that will sink any ship that threatens local wildlife. I'd say that's a pretty sweet SCP. Coming in at number 3, we've got SCP-1569. Anyone here ever been punched by a shrimp? No? Well, thank your lucky stars, because that is the last thing you want. Especially when it's a massive, weirdly modified peacock mantis shrimp meant exclusively for punching extremely hard. I'm sure you've heard of a peacock mantis shrimp before. They're famous for being able to absolutely annihilate stuff in front of them with extremely fast punches. If you put a regular one in an aquarium, there's a good chance that it will smash the glass by displacing water in such a way that it creates like a shockwave. But when you get one as large as 1569, you better believe it can cause a whole lot more damage. The big shrimp is 1 meter tall, 2 meters wide, and 9 meters long, and get this, its punch can strike with a force of up to 51,000 newtons. That would just vaporize someone, and imagine the shockwave. At first, it appeared that this odd underwater entity had the intelligence of an average dog and was content to just hang out with people. Sure, it would go and absolutely pulverize some underwater prey from time to time, but other than that, it just seemed like an extra powerful version of a creature that already existed. However, one day something weird happened. The shrimp went dormant and opened up like a living mech, and out popped the dude in competitive swimwear. And if I'm understanding the subsequent events correctly, this dude was essentially piloting this gigantic shrimp. Why? How? Was he the one acting like a dog? We may never know. But there is a special insignia on both the shrimp suit and the man inside, and it seems that there are some other strange connecting threads. Coming in at number 2, we've got SCP-2770. No good deed goes unpunished, am I right? And this is especially true when you're out on the high seas and come across what appears to be a stranded man on an inflatable life raft. Most folks would head right over to help the poor castaway, right? But did any of them stop and think about why he might be out there in the first place? Oh boy. 2770 is a strange phenomenon where vessels spot what appear to be a poor unfortunate soul floating along on a yellow dinghy. It will appear and attempt to flag down manned vessels nearby, seemingly looking for rescue. If the vessel it targets does indeed come over to pick him up, it will initiate what's known as a boarding event. This is when an anomalous submarine will surface nearby and open its hatch. Once this hatch is open, it's game over. The rescuing vessel, along with the dude in the raft, will be pulled underwater at speeds upwards of 200 miles per hour, never to be seen again. Well, the castaway will appear again, but the other vessel? It's done. There doesn't seem to be a limit on the size of things that can get yanked underwater by this anomaly, and it has been seen pulling truly enormous ships to their doom. One time, the Foundation even scooped the stranded man up in a helicopter and brought him back to HQ away from any large source of water. They thought they were so clever until they remembered the water table. The Foundation site he was brought to is no longer in operation. And finally, at number 1, we've got SCP-169, the Leviathan. There's nothing quite like this in the sea, so you'd better watch out. Sailors and mariners have been talking about this creature for centuries. It's the stuff of legends. What else could inspire awe at such a level and survive for ages and ages? At this point, the Foundation really has nothing they can do about it, so they just try and keep the legends, well, legendary. It measures somewhere between 2,000 and 8,000 square kilometers and moves quite slowly under the water. Because it's so huge, there isn't really anything anyone can do about it. No structures can be built to contain it, and no weapons can be engineered to destroy it. Any satellite images of it shifting are to be destroyed. So sleep easy with the knowledge that it's been around longer than pretty much anything else on the surface of the planet and likely isn't going anywhere soon. Can't do anything about it, why worry?
Coming in at number 5, Cyclops. I mean, we can't have a giant creature list without including one of the most infamous giants in history, Cyclops. Hailing from Greek mythology and then later Roman mythology, the Cyclops were giant one-eyed creatures who can be distinguished in 3 groups. In Hesiod's theogony, they are the brothers Brontes, Steropus, and Argus, I think, who provided Zeus with his weapon, the Thunderbolt. In Homer's Odyssey, they are an uncivilized group of shepherds, the brethren of Polyphemus encountered by Odysseus. Cyclopses were also famous as the builders of the Cyclopean walls of Mycenae and Tyrannus. For the sake of avoiding confusion, let's focus our attention to the Homeric Cyclopses. In an episode of Homer's Odyssey, the hero Odysseus encounters the Cyclops Polyphemus, the son of Poseidon, a one-eyed man-eating giant who lives with his fellow Cyclopses in a distant land. They live in the world of men rather than among the gods. Homeric Cyclopses are presented as uncivilized shepherds, savages, and have no regard for Zeus. They live solitary lives and have no government. They are said to be inhospitable to strangers, slaughtering and eating all who come to their land. Coming in at number 4, Corb or the Fomorians. The Fomorians are a supernatural race in Irish mythology, often portrayed as hostile and monstrous beings who come from under the sea or the earth. However, later they were portrayed as giants and sea raiders and enemies of Ireland's first settlers. They appear to have once been gods who represent the harmful or destructive powers of nature, personifications of chaos, darkness, death, blight, and drought. In Old and Middle Irish, the race is typically called the Fomor or Fomori, with an individual member being called a Fomor. They are often regarded as malevolent spirits dwelling underwater and in the nether regions of the earth, before later being portrayed as the aforementioned sea raiders. This was heavily influenced by the Viking raids on Ireland that were taking place during this time. Oftentimes they were depicted as having the body of a man and the head of a goat, and according to an 11th century book, they are said to have one eye, one arm, and one leg. Coming in at 3, Titans. Hailing from Greek mythology, the Titans were the pre-Olympian gods. According to the theogony of Hesiod, they were the 12 children of the primordial parents Uranus and his mother Gaia, with 6 male Titans, Oceanus, Cous, Creus, Hyperion, Lapetus, and Cronus, and 6 female Titans called the Titanides. Cronus mated with his sister Rhea, and together they became the first generation of Olympians. Zeus and his 5 siblings, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Descendants of the Titans are also called Titans. The Titans were also former gods, the generation of gods preceding the Olympians. They were ultimately overthrown as part of the Greek succession myth, which told how Cronus seized power from his father Uranus and ruled the cosmos with the Titans as his subordinates. Now Cronus and the Titans were in turn defeated and replaced as the ruling pantheon of gods by Zeus and the Olympians in a tenure referred to as the Titanomachy. As a result of the war, Cronus and the vanquished Titans were banished from the upper world, being held imprisoned under guard in Tartarus, although according to history some of these Titans were allowed to remain free. Coming in at 2, Fatchin. Hailing from Scottish folklore, the Fatchan or Fatchin is a monster or giant described by John Francis Campbell in popular tales of the West Highlands, as having a single eye in the middle of its face, a single hand protruding from its chest instead of arms, and a single leg emerging from its central axis. Not only that, but it has a single tuft of hair on the top of its head, which Campbell says, I quote, "It were easier to take a mountain from the root than to bend that tuft." Quite the tuft indeed. However, Campbell isn't the only writer to reference the giant. Douglas Hyde did so too in his collection of Irish folklore called Beside the Fires. I quote, "He held a very thick iron flay club in his skinny hand and 20 chains out of it, and 50 apples on each chain of them, and a great venomous spell on each great apple of them, and a girdle of the skins of deer and roebuck around the thing that was his body, and one eye in the forehead of his black-faced countenance, and one bare, hard, very hairy hand coming out of his chest, and one veiny, thick-soled leg supporting him, and a close, firm, dark blue mantle of twisted, hard, thick feathers protecting his body. And surely he was more like unto devil than to man." Now, though hailing from different countries, both descriptions seem to represent branches of a common Gaelic tradition. Finally, coming in at number 1, Caicus. Hailing from Roman mythology, Caicus, meaning bad, was a fire-breathing giant and the son of Vulcan. He was ultimately killed by Hercules after terrorizing the Aventine Hill before the founding of Rome. However, let's go back. Cacus lived in a cave in Italy on the future site of Rome. To survive, he feasted on the flesh of humans and would nail the heads of victims to the doors of his cave. Now, like I said, he would later be defeated by Hercules, and according to Evander, Hercules stopped to pasture the cattle he had stolen from Geryon near Cacus's lair. As Hercules slept, the giant took a liking to the cattle and stole 8 of them, 4 bulls and 4 cows, dragging them by their tails so as to leave a trail in the wrong direction. When Hercules awoke, the remaining cattle made suggestive noises towards the cave, so Hercules, now angry, stormed towards the cave, and a terrified Cacus blocked the entrance with a vast, immovable boulder, so Hercules quite literally tore off the top of the mountain to reach him. Cacus responded with spewing fire and smoke, while Hercules attacked with tree branches and rocks the size of millstones. Hercules eventually leapt into the cave, aiming for the area where the smoke was heaviest, and grabbed Cacus, strangling the monster to death. According to Virgil in Book 8 of the Aeneid, Hercules grasped Cacus so tightly that his eyes popped out and there was no blood left in his throat. Yikes.
Kicking off at number 5, Destroy All Monsters, 1968. Alright, probably the best place to start if you're not sure what kaiju cinema is by ramming together pretty much every single kaiju ever and making them throw down in a titanic battle to the death. And I mean, it's probably important to note that this movie features perhaps the most kaiju in any giant monster movie ever. We're talking Godzilla, Mothra, Rodan, King Ghidorah, Anguirus, Manila. It goes without saying, but they're pretty big players, and obviously anytime Godzilla, Mothra and Rodan get together, you know that some pretty big stuff is going to go down. Directed by Ishiro Honda, one of the biggest players in the Showa era of kaiju cinema and one of Toho Studios' best and brightest assets, Destroy All Monsters takes place in a time of pure utopia, where world peace has been achieved by the year 1999, and all of the giant monsters that have previously tried to destroy the planet have instead been captured and confined to an area known as Monsterland. However, just when all seems well, all of these monsters are broken out of their metaphorical giant prison and instead mind controlled by an alien species known as the Kilax, who then send the kaiju to attack major cities across the planet. We're talking Godzilla tearing apart New York City, Rodan invading Moscow, and Mothra and her larval offspring laying waste to the cities of Beijing. Thankfully, Earth's defenses, spearheaded by the United Nations Science Committee in their first appearance, eventually wrestled back control of the poor mind control kaiju. But that's when the Kilax send their biggest and baddest nasty of all time, King Ghidorah himself, and then stuff really gets blown to smithereens. The thing is, although not quite campy enough to be mid-70s kaiju brilliance, and not quite gritty enough to be mid-80s and 90s kaiju raw action, Destroy All Monsters sits somewhere between the two, and yet, most importantly, it's just pure fun. Destroy All Monsters is insane, and it's a time where Toho Studios figured, what the heck, we've got all of these monsters, we may as well put them through their paces. Although not a highlight of kaiju history in any way, it sets the precedent for many more to come. Swinging in at number 4, Giant Monsters All Out Attack, 2001. And if you're looking for a real mouthful, then why don't you try Godzilla, Mothra and King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. Yeah, because who cares about film titles anymore, right? Thankfully for us though, although colloquially dubbed GMK by kaiju monster movie fans, 2001's Giant Monsters All Out Attack is perhaps one of the most accessible kaiju movies ever made. The thing is, whilst it certainly embraces the unabashed cheesiness that earlier Showa era and Heisei era kaiju movies were so famed for, this one was made during the short period known as the Millennium era. And strangely enough, much like the zeitgeist captured in that period of cinema, GMK is surprisingly dark. For a kaiju movie, it's gritty as all hell, and although not perfect in any sense, there are moments in this movie that really turn the franchise on its head. And to address the kaiju elephant in the room, yes, Giant Monsters All Out Attack is hated by certain portions of the fanbase, given the fact that King Ghidorah, the ultimate adversary of all time, is instead the good guy in this story. And that means only one thing: our beloved Godzilla is the villain. Written and directed by Shusuke Kaneko, GMK features Godzilla as a ravenous returning force during a time where the world and the brave and noble JSDF are nervous about where and when Godzilla will strike again. Unbeknownst to them though, Godzilla is actually possessed by the souls of the dead that were lost during the events of World War II. And then the only thing left to do is for an unlikely alliance to be forged between Mothra, King Ghidorah and Baragon. Although the themes aren't always clear in this movie, and although they miss more often than they hit, GMK is one of the most complete giant monster movies of recent times. Although the unconventional Godzilla is kind of a hated theme, start to finish, GMK is entertaining. And that's the most important thing. Next up at number 3, King Kong vs. Godzilla, 1962. I'll be damned if this isn't one of the finest moments in kaiju cinema of all time. Really, to be a fan of this type of cinema, you have to adhere to a certain set of disbelief. When there's a guy in a lizard suit rolling around a fake background, yeah, sometimes it doesn't always work. And whilst that is certainly the case in 1962 King Kong vs. Godzilla, holy moly, if there aren't some absolutely astounding moments of cinema to be found here. It's crazy because what's so great about this genre is that Toho Studios just didn't care. Not in the sense that they didn't put their heart and soul into these movies, because that's exactly what they did. They just didn't do things by a certain playbook. Hollywood be damned as far as they were concerned, because they wanted to put one guy in a lizard suit and one guy in a gorilla outfit and then make the best damn movie that they could. This is the culmination of that very spirit, King Kong vs. Godzilla, and whilst next year there is a remake coming our way, if you've got a spare 90 minutes, just give this movie a watch. Really, this is one of the finest examples of kaiju cinema going, and it's certainly worth your attention. Again, directed by Ishiro Honda and written by Shinichi Sekizawa, the story behind King Kong vs. Godzilla originally began with the giant Lord of the Apes actually throwing down with some version of a giant Frankenstein monster, which, let's not beat about the bush, would have been absolutely awesome, but thankfully for us, Toho snapped out of it and realised that the giant lizard king would be a far greater adversary. Obviously, the narrative behind this movie is pretty self-explanatory, but the cultural impact that this movie has had on science fiction cinema is kind of staggering. There are so many urban myths and legends about this movie that it's worth experiencing that just for the fact, and whilst most of them aren't exactly true, the ending to King Kong vs. Godzilla is one of the most epic conclusions of 20th century cinema. This movie is brilliant, and its historical significance should not be forgotten. Coming in at number 2, Gojira, Guardian of the Universe, 1995. Finally, we have a place to put this movie. And yeah, whatever. This movie isn't scary in the slightest, but my word, if this movie isn't all kinds of marvelous, then I don't know what is. The thing is, we get it. We love Godzilla, we love King Kong, they're the greatest, but until this movie, Gojira was one of the most overlooked kaiju monsters of all time. Put it this way, Guardian of the Universe was both a reboot of the franchise and also the 9th movie featuring the turtle-shelled monster hero. Gojira is persistent, and the payoff, surprisingly, was one of the greatest kaiju movies of all time. Gojira is a kaiju like no other. He's a massive, fire-breathing, prehistoric turtle, and much like his Godzilla brethren, he was mutated via exposure to nuclear weapons. At the start of the kaiju franchise, Gojira was an all-consuming, aggressive force, but slowly, as the franchise evolved, Gojira took a backseat to his other more famous kaiju co-stars, and eventually was forced into a niche, to say the least. You see, eventually Gojira took on a less malevolent force, and instead, he became a defender of humanity, particularly human children, and a guardian of our planet against extraterrestrial alien forces. All of this finally culminated in his reinvention of a reinvention in 1995's Gojira, Guardian of the Universe, and this movie is astounding because of it. Written by Kazunori Ito and directed by Shusuke Kaneko, again, Gojira, Guardian of the Universe embodies that same spirit that Toho Studios have perfected over the decades. This movie is just freaking fun. It's so fantastically bizarre that you can't help but be entertained. Gyros flying through the skies, attacking people left, right and center, and the giant fire-breathing turtle, who is a friend to all human children, saving the day. In many ways, this entry embodies everything that we love about kaiju cinema, and as a side note, the following Gojira-centric movies are also worth a watch. Again, if you're looking for some 90 minutes of entertainment, you really cannot go wrong with Gojira. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Gojira, 1954. It just has to be, doesn't it? And whilst over here at Top 5 Scary Videos, we do indeed favour doing things a little differently when it comes to picking our particular movie entries, we don't need that here. You see, kaiju monster movies already speak for themselves in that regard, or well, roar for themselves, I guess. And 1954's Gojira, the most important giant monster movie that has ever emerged from Japan, exemplifies that fact entirely. This is the definitive Godzilla movie, and still to this day, over 60 years later, 1954's Gojira is unrivaled. It is astounding how well this movie is held up, and much like some of the suit work seen in King Kong vs. Godzilla, some of the scenes that were captured in this movie were hallmark moments in science fiction cinema. Following its release, Ishiro Honda, the man behind 1954's Gojira and one of Toho Studios' most legendary kaiju contributions, said, "If Godzilla had been a dinosaur or some other animal, he would have been killed with just one cannonball. But if he were equal to an atomic bomb, we wouldn't know what to do. So I took the characteristics of an atomic bomb and then applied them to Godzilla." You see, this is exactly why kaiju monster movies captured something so special. They exemplified an era, a period of Japanese history that was still trying to recover from the horrors of the Second World War. In fact, the destruction seen throughout this black and white B-movie, metaphorically speaking, still can rival some of the most expensive and well-produced giant monster movies ever made. 1954's Gojira is a masterclass in how to make a giant monster truly terrifying. Low angles, ample pacing on the reveal, high-angled shots of the ant-like human survivors fleeing in terror. Gojira is sci-fi horror 101. Whilst this genre isn't exactly for everyone, the influence it has had on the horror genre is undeniable. This movie cemented Godzilla as the definitive, unrivaled giant monster, and since its release way back when in 1954, few films have come close to toppling it. Kicking off at number 5, Them, 1954.
Mountain lions never come down into the desert.
No cat ever lived leave a print like that.
Maybe something was set down there.
Alright guys, a lot of you folks called for some classic black and white style monster movies, and yet I held off including the more iconic of them, given the fact that, yeah, no matter how much you like to argue against it, they're still pretty damn dated. However, one of those movies may well be impervious to the sands of time, and of course it would feature an equally impervious creature as its titular monstrosity. Them, a movie about giant radioactive ants, released way back when in 1954. And yet, despite its initial premise promising some unabashed cheese of the 50s variety, surprisingly this movie holds up phenomenally well. Particularly in its opening scene, which from a horror perspective was actually way ahead of its time. The sad truth is though, from our high and mighty tower of 2019, when we look back at black and white cinema, they have to work extra hard for them to stand the test of time. Granted, movies like Psycho, 1933's King Kong and the original Godzilla are iconic in their own right, but still, the truth remains the same. To be good, you gotta be the best. Directed by Gordon Douglas with a story from George Worthing Yates, Them tells the tale of two New Mexico police officers, Sergeant Ben Peterson, played by James Whitmore, who in his later life would go on to play Brooks from The Shawshank Redemption, alongside Trooper Ed Blackburn, as they discover a young girl distraught, wandering the desert in a strange, almost catatonic state. They take her to a nearby trailer set up by her family who were vacationing there, only to find that he's been mysteriously and savagely attacked by a strange, almost impossibly large creature. Well, what ensues is a classic cat and mouse pursuit of two intrigued police officers following in the wake of this destruction, and whilst anything else would be spoilers, when this movie gets going, it actually really gets going because, well, giant radioactive ants. That's why. That's all I'm saying. Despite that though, for a movie that during its time would have relied on being a quick cash grab, instead, Them actually takes its time in portraying an incredibly compelling narrative. For storyline and performance alone, this movie is worth a watch, and yes, whilst the effects may be dated, the bones of this movie are giant monster cinema 101. Swinging in at number 4, Prophecy, 1979. And if you thought Annihilation was cool for featuring some mutated Ursine, think again, because 1979's Prophecy was doing it before it was even cool. And that's the point of this movie actually, because still 1979's Prophecy gets so trashed by critics that it's hard to see the mutated leaves for the trees. You see, as a creature feature, Prophecy is like playing a feral druid in an RPG. There's more metamorphoses than you can shake a branch at, but as a giant monster movie, this movie relies on a hodgepodge of all of those creatures into one giant pile of vile, mutagenic flesh. Sounds gross? Well yeah, that's because it is, and Prophecy loses quite a bit of its sheen down to the fact that the practical effects aren't exactly the greatest in this movie, especially when you understand the choices that this movie made in watering them down, but still, there's something quite charming about Prophecy that makes it worth its salt, and most importantly, like all worthy monster movies, this one has a message. Written by David Saltzer and directed by John Frankenheimer, the brilliant yet troubled director responsible for 1962's Birdman of Alcatraz, amongst many others, Prophecy was the first flagship title of the so-called Hollywood North, a business move in the late 70s intended to give a facelift for cinema in Canada. And what better way to do that than to create a story about a giant, vengeful forest spirit hell-bent on destroying a paper mill in the woodland of North America. I mean, yeah, it is set in Maine, but still, you get the picture. It tells the tale of Dr. Robert Verne, an environmental scientist who was commissioned to undertake undertaker report about 3 lumberjacks that had mysteriously disappeared. Obviously, his pregnant wife accompanies him, because of course that's a sensible thing to do, and suddenly Dr. Verne witnesses something incredibly wrong with this forest. Giant salmon, vicious raccoons, tadpoles the size of bullfrogs, because why not? This movie essentially takes the ending scene of Jumanji and injects it with some highly mutagenic substances and then just lets everything go to hell. Don't piss off Mother Nature, guys. That's all I'm saying. No, but seriously, save the planet. Next up at number 3, Monsters 2010. Okay, here we have a pretty difficult one. On the one tentacle, Monsters features some of the most remarkable special effects that I've ever seen from a debut feature filmmaker. On the other tentacle, 2010's Monsters is difficult to access. This movie has a very peculiar pacing that makes it difficult to truly get behind, and on first viewing of this movie, I was left a little underwhelmed. However, when you watch this movie back, the craftsmanship behind it is astonishing. And for a film that promises on delivering a certain set of expectations, it certainly does that and then completely subverts them. Hey, maybe you'll be blown away by this movie like quite a number of people are and were, but all I'm saying is, if it doesn't stick, give it another chance. Also, the guy who made this movie, Gareth Edwards, well, I went to the same college as he did, and I grew up in the same town, so yeah. Please don't think I'm being biased. And also, just saying, but Gareth Edwards is awesome, and both 2014's Godzilla and Star Wars Rogue One were remarkable efforts. Monsters tells a tale of a NASA deep space probe that, after crash landing in the wilderness of Mexico, sprouts extraterrestrial life forms that rapidly spread throughout the Mexico-US border region, subsequently leading to the quarantine of the northern half of Mexico. Quickly, both the US and Mexican troops frantically battle to contain these creatures, and so a huge wall stretches the entirety of the border and is quickly assembled. Sound familiar? Yeah, this movie is geopolitical and it pulls no punches in that regard. It's also prophetic, maybe, which is pretty weird to say, but whatever. It stars Scoot McNairy, who is awesome, by the way, as an American photojournalist tasked with finding his boss's daughter, played by Whitney Able, who is stranded in a Mexican hospital in the heartlands of the ravaged zone. And that's all I'll say, really, because this movie is a road movie without any roads, just giant tentacular creatures roaming the wasteland. Also, it's important to note that this movie isn't exactly scary, but instead it offers a far more refreshing angle to the giant monster genre, and that alone is worth taking a look at. Coming in at number 2, The Relic, 1997. Pretty unfortunate timing that, isn't it? This movie, like many others, makes SWAT teams look incredibly inefficient. Sorry SWAT, but it's a pretty glaring trope that I just had to point out. If you see a SWAT team, you know things are gonna get, well, pretty bad. Now, if you guys didn't know, I absolutely love this weird little 90s oddball of a movie, and so it only feels appropriate that somewhere down the line we just have to give it a place on our giant monster movies list. Cthulhu certainly stands the test of time in that regard, and although flawed in many ways, the amount of unabashed 90s brilliance that is poured into this movie is truly a feat to be witnessed. This movie is just fun, and if we're in the mood for being comparative, 1997's The Relic is the deep impact of the movie monster world, and whilst we all know that Deep Impact is far superior to Armageddon, in that regard The Relic is kind of unrivaled too. And not only is it unrivaled, it's just fun. This movie is so damn entertaining that you should give it a watch just for that sake. Directed by Peter Hyams and based upon the 1995 novel of the same name by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child, The Relic tells a tale of Dr. Margot Green, played by the awesome Penelope Ann Miller, an evolutionary biologist who is stationed at the Field Museum of Natural History in downtown Chicago. Here, during her application for a brand new research grant, she stumbles upon the unearthed research of a missing anthropologist, Dr. John Whitney, who has seemingly disappeared after studying the cultural practices of a tribe in the jungles of South America. Now, part of this research is a strange stone statue that depicts a creature known only as the Cthulhu, a mythical monster that rules the forgotten jungles of South America. And then, of course, suddenly and out of nowhere, people just start losing their heads and their brains willy-nilly in all manners of crazy, mysterious, museum-based monstrosities. If you enjoy ominous camera work around dark corridors, and if you enjoy the premise of loosely based anthropology in one of the most underrated and entertaining movies of the 90s with some remarkable performances to boot, giant monster included, then this movie is certainly for you. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, The Ritual, 2017. Alright, and guys, let's pull no punches. If it's scary that you came for, then scary is what you're going to get. Truth be told, as has been highlighted in both parts of this series, when it comes to actual giant monsters in horror cinema, it's relatively difficult to efficiently deliver the spooks. It's like a sliding scale, really, and the larger these creatures become, then the more that the technicalities of horror cinema become diminished. It's difficult to balance, and perhaps the reason that many of these monster movies have instead relied on the tried and tested trope of creating the most convincingly large creature imaginable, 2017's The Ritual, however, is perhaps the finest balance of the two. And although we have already covered it in a creature feature regard, it is only proper that we give it its place here too. Mainly for the fact that, well, the Jotun is pretty damn large, and terrifying, and weird. But yeah, that's just what we've come to expect when it comes to the mythological monstrosities of the ancient Norse. That goes without saying. Directed by David Bruckner with a screenplay by Joe Barton, 2017's The Ritual is based upon the 2011 novel of the same name by Adam Neville, which is surprisingly brilliant. The film itself stars Rafe Spall, Arsha Ali, Robert James Collier, and Sam Troughton, who all offer some freaking fantastic performances in this movie and play Luke, Phil, Hutch, and Dom respectively, four best friends who agree to hike the Kungsleden Forest in Sarek National Park, northern Sweden, following the tragic death of their longtime friend Rob, who wished to hike the trail before he was murdered in an effort to bring their struggling friendship back together. Spoilers, kind of. And really, that's kind of all there is to The Ritual, without giving any other spoilers away, because it's four best friends trapped in a terrifying forest as a giant monster and its fanatical death cult roam the woodland ready to ruin everyone's day. And yet, although the brilliance of this movie relies on some well-constructed interlocking narratives, ultimately resulting in a more than cathartic ending, the best part of 2017's The Ritual is the creature design alone. Seriously, the less we say about the Jotun, the better, but this film features one of the most unique monster designs of recent times, and whilst not as big as Godzilla or King Kong, as so far as originality in horror cinema goes, this giant, terrifying demigod is certainly worth the zealotry. Give it a watch. Kicking off at number 5, Dark Was the Night, 2014. Alright guys, let's be honest, it's pretty difficult to be completely terrified by any sort of monster movie given enough scale, because the bigger they are, the easier they are to completely phase out any kind of tangible fear. Take note on that, because in this list we'll be scaling our expectations down a little bit, but it may also leave you scratching your head and asking the question, what's the difference between a giant monster movie and a creature feature? I don't get it, Jack. And the answer is, not a lot really, and also, I don't really get it either, but primarily it relies on a trope that coincidentally movies like Godzilla pioneered, and that is the fear of the unknown, but not in the cosmic horror sense, but in not knowing exactly what we're dealing with until it's too late. Let me introduce you to this movie, Dark Was the Night, a straight to DVD B movie that surprisingly is absolutely brilliant, and more importantly, it's pretty bloody scary, and it packs one of the most well-written endings to any kind of monster-based horror, I think. And you know what? It also stars Kevin Durand in the leading role, the guy who plays Kimi in Lost, Harbard in Vikings, and loads of other mid-caliber roles through movies and television. And in this instance, it's an absolute pleasure to see him take the lead, because he certainly can carry a movie if given the chance. Written by Tyler Heisel and directed by Jack Keller, Dark Was the Night tells the tale of the small isolated town of Maiden Woods, where Sheriff Paul Shields, played by Durand, is investigating a series of bizarre disappearances alongside his new deputy, Donnie Saunders, played by Lucas Haas, who is also pretty damn good in this film. Obviously, as you may imagine, the disappearances have something to do with an ancient evil that lingers in the woods, and that's all I'll say, because the writing behind this movie is pretty remarkable. And for a B movie, it's even more impressive. The creature design is fantastic, the pacing is spot on, and the finale to this movie will leave you pretty astounded in some way or another. More importantly, it's just downright entertaining, and whilst these monsters aren't exactly King Kong, they're full to the teeth with horror. Swinging in at number 4, The Monster, 2016. And again, another movie that came out in the past decade that seemingly flew beneath the radar and still is pretty damn brilliant. The thing is though, whilst this movie certainly does exactly what it says on the tin, as in, well, the name of this movie is pretty damn clear, it's also important to note that this movie certainly isn't for everyone. If I said to you that it's an A24 movie, then that may clear things up a little, but also if you're in the mood for a subversion of the genre that also deals with some pretty damn terrifying psychological implications regardless, then yeah, this is certainly the movie for you. Also, giant man-eating monsters abound, and all that jazz. Written and directed by Brian Bettino, the man responsible for 2008's The Strangers. If I had to draw a genre comparison for this movie, I'd say that 2016's The Monster is to monster movies as 2012's The Battery is to zombie movies. Yeah, it takes a little bit more to enjoy than the typical sit back and witness the destruction, but that does not mean it's not worthwhile. It tells the tale of Kathy, played by Zoe Kazan, who is pretty remarkable here, and her 10-year-old daughter Lizzie, played by Ella Ballantyne, who are driving to her father's house as it's his turn to share Lizzie's custody. The thing is, from the off, we're overloaded with some pretty stark information. Lizzie, a 10-year-old girl, is sick and tired of taking care of her abusive, alcoholic mother Kathy, and she makes it pretty damn clear that she intends to live with her father permanently. While as the trip stretches on and darkness descends, the pair hit a wolf in their car, killing it. However, on closer inspection, it seems that the wolf was already on its last legs, as it had been attacked by something far bigger and far more ferocious. And yeah, as you may imagine, the rest is spoilers, but really, 2016's The Monster is such a refreshing departure from the norm that it's a must-see in my books. But it also paints itself with the same vivid tropes of the monster genre, as we catch glimpses of a far more terrifying creature in the periphery. Next up at number 3, Cloverfield, 2008. You know what, guys? I've said it before and I will say it again. Cloverfield doesn't get the credit that it deserves, and as far as giant monster movies go that actually do justice to the science fiction horror genre as a whole, then Cloverfield is perhaps one of the closest and most recent depictions of just exactly that. Cloverfield is awesome, and also as a side note, if the whisperings are to be believed, we'll be getting a hopefully worthy sequel to this movie sooner rather than later, which is reason enough to be excited really. The thing is, we spoke in the intro about kaiju movies and how they are the quintessential example of giant monster movies, but as we also mentioned, they also aren't exactly scary. Cloverfield, in my opinion, is the remedy to that, and in turn it was inspired by the reverence that the author J.J. Abrams has as a filmmaker for Godzilla and all of his friends. His intention was to give life to the western version of the kaiju genre, and he did exactly that, whilst also staying true to the promise of horror. For those of you that haven't yet seen it or brushed it off as another Hollywood cash grab, please give it a chance, it's awesome. Written by Drew Goddard, the man behind the brilliant Netflix Daredevil series, and directed by Matt Reeves, the man behind the Planet of the Apes series, Cloverfield of course was put together by J.J. Abrams' Bad Robot Studios with the intention of breathing life to giant monster movies for a western audience. Shot from a found footage perspective, it tells the tale of a man named Rob Hawkins and his then girlfriend Beth, who whilst during a party in downtown New York City find themselves in the midst of a giant monster attack in which the city itself is torn asunder by a terrifying unknown alien lifeform. You see, the original Godzilla movies have analytically been related to the devastating World War II atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, a metaphorical cultural expression of the tragedy that unfolded. Subsequently, in many ways, Cloverfield has been tied to New York City's own tragic destructive event with the 9/11 attacks. For that reason, and that reason alone, I think Cloverfield deserves its place as a cultural titan of sci-fi and horror. It truly does. Coming in at number 2, The Host, 2006. Alright guys, this is where things get difficult, because in many ways, 2006 The Host is perhaps one of the finest monster movies ever made. Period. This movie truly is remarkable, and whilst we've covered it on several occasions in our Korean horror movies list, in relation to monster movies, we really can't let it slip on by like an amphibious radioactive sea creature slipping beneath a sewer. The thing is though, where it becomes difficult is that like several movies on this list, The Host is a genre mashup of sorts. This is a movie about family and loss and grief, and also a bizarre mixture of action and black comedy that is actually hilarious in parts, in places that it really shouldn't be. I mean, it's a result of South Korean filmmaking as a whole being incredibly transcendent with genre, playing with themes and tropes that Western directors wouldn't otherwise do, and yet truth be told, the results are startling. It makes for a movie the likes of which can't be replicated, and that alone is reason enough to see it. Also, please don't get this movie confused with the 2013 movie The Host, because, yeah. No thank you. Written and directed by Bong Joon-ho, the awesome South Korean director and man behind Snowpiercer, which you should also take a look at if you haven't, the host tells the tale of Park Gang-do, a slow-witted guy who runs a snack bar on the banks of the Hum River, who witnesses his daughter Hyun-so get kidnapped by a gigantic, grossly mutated amphibious creature that was created by a secretive chemical spill and subsequent cover-up by US authorities, which then subsequently sends the city of Seoul into complete and utter mayhem, as you may imagine, really. Obviously spoilers are abound from here on in, so we'll leave it at that, but really, the host does something incredibly impressive with the giant monster genre. It's terrifying, it's hilarious in places, and most importantly, this giant monster movie actually has heart. Maybe even like 3 hearts, actually. Probably. And finally, coming in at number 1 spot, Troll Hunter, 2010. Alright guys, you wanted giant monster movies, you got it. Now, I've certainly ummed and ahed about it, and after lengthy deliberation, I'm fairly certain that this movie delivers everything we've ever wanted when it comes to being awestruck by a species of creature that domineers our very human-sized landscape. Troll Hunter is exactly that. It's smart, it's well executed, and most importantly, this film is gigantic in scale. The thing is, I think quite a lot of people brush this movie off as too ridiculous to ever have been worthwhile, and whilst you may be thinking that the notion of trolls are an overbaked concept in folklore, never mind in horror cinema, the best part of this film is that most importantly, it believes in itself. At not a single point in this movie did I ever stop and think that visual authenticity was important to this film, because it's not. Hey, in some instances the visuals behind this movie aren't exactly great, but you know what supersedes that? The suspension of disbelief. I believe in this movie because from start to finish, much like with Cloverfield, what we are witnessing is the documentation of events from a human perspective. You see, it may seem obvious, but the giants in the movie are far more giant if you see them through the eyes of the terrified creature trying to survive on the ground. Hint, that's us humans. I don't know guys, I could ramble on about this movie for days, but as far as giant monster movies go, Troll Hunter is one of the finest examples ever made. Written and directed by Andre Øvredal, the man responsible for the autopsy of Jane Doe, which is also awesome, Troll Hunter tells the tale of a group of students from Volda University College who set out to make a documentary about a suspected bear poacher out in the Norwegian wilderness. Well, they soon find the bear poacher, but as they also soon find out, it's certainly not bears that he's after, but a far bigger and far more terrifying kind of creature. Honestly guys, Troll Hunter is awesome. It really, really, really is. If you haven't yet seen it, please give it a watch. You won't be disappointed.
Coming in at number 5, we've got SCP-352, the Old Crone, the Witch, the revenge-fueled Russian, Baba Yaga. We've all heard some variation of this story at some point, whether it was done up in a movie, for a TV show, or even as a monster in a creepypasta. Well, Baba Yaga exists in the SCP universe too, and she is quite the handful. She appears to be an old, emaciated woman, but that's just how she looks. This SCP is much faster and stronger than her appearance belies, able to lift things as heavy as 200 kilograms with little effort and moving as fast as 70 kilometers per hour. She can even recover from wounds that would be fatal to other humans, even stuff like disembowelment. An absolute force to be reckoned with for sure, and that is just the beginning. She can grow strange, clear hairs from different points on her body at a pretty fast rate, and these have been reported as creeping and crawling across surfaces. They're covered in a strange enzyme that 352 produces, which on contact with human tissue causes a horrific reaction. Those affected by this enzyme will stop logically thinking altogether and cease to feel any pain. They enter a state of euphoria during which Baba Yaga begins to eat them limb by limb over the course of many days. So even though they're being eaten, they don't really know what's going on. This SCP was originally discovered in a Russian forest after many people reported mysterious disappearances in the area. And if we look to Russian folklore, we find a lot of the same characteristics attributed to the legendary character. Baba Yaga has appeared in hundreds of folktales with a variety of hallmarks that seem to be closely associated with her. There's the hut with chicken legs, a mortar and pestle, and the mop/broom that appear quite often. She's also regarded as being especially ferocious looking and tends to be extremely repulsive to those who behold her. After all those years terrorizing Slavic folks who dared to enter magical forests, she's finally been contained by the SCP Foundation, although they tend to have a lot of trouble keeping her contained. As of right now, the Foundation is attempting to find a type of food that will keep her satisfied and docile, but human flesh is the only thing that seems to elicit said behavior. Good thing there's a lot of D-class, right? Coming in at number 4, we've got SCP-1826, the Wild Hunt. This is a tale as old as time, often characterized by a large group of hunters being led through a truly insane expedition by a god or other powerful creature. While the term itself was coined by Jacob Grimm, there have been examples of this kind of story all throughout history, all across different cultures. When you encounter a wild hunt, that's bad news. They tend to be omens of catastrophe, whether that be war, famine, or plague. Although for some folks, it just means they're gonna die soon, which sucks, but at least it's only bad for one person. SCP-1826 is an adapted version of the wild hunt, as seen by folks at the Foundation. There's an office building somewhere in the Ukraine that hosts a yearly wild hunt. Nobody really understands how it all got started, but here we are. During the month of March, this place is totally off limits. If any sort of sapient organism enters this empty cubicle graveyard during that time frame, they're gonna get swept up in the excitement. And by excitement, I mean they're gonna have to partake in the hunt, which will guarantee their untimely death. Yeah. Also, there has to be a black canine in the building for this to work, but that happens surprisingly often for whatever reason. So when the wild hunt begins, the entity that causes it will manifest in its host body in front of whatever person has entered the building. They will announce their intent to engage them and hand them a weapon. The hunt begins and they attempt to avoid whoever is there for as long as possible. And when a fatality occurs, the corpse gets absorbed into the walls. What a fun pastime for glory, I suppose. At that point, the foliage will begin to rapidly grow in the area. Folks have claimed to see dozens of winged humanoids manifesting in the area, which may be instances of folks who didn't survive the hunt, or possibly just some entities who were historically connected to the leader of the hunt. Hard to say for sure, but pretty interesting. These days, the SCP is neutralized. See, when these winged entities made their way out into the open on one occasion, an MTF opened fire on them and collected the 22 corpses that resulted. So for now, the wild hunt has been called off, and since then, nobody's entered the building during March. Probably for the best in the end. Coming in at number 3, we've got SCP-1448. Urban legends are mythology too. Modern mythology, stuff that highlights the values and fears of the populace today. Usually we associate mythology with ancient tales from long-lost societies, but we're living in a culture that will one day be considered ancient. Better write all these down, eh? This SCP is specifically associated with the creation of urban legend. It's an incorporeal entity that is really hard to see, can shapeshift rapidly, and tends to migrate often. Wherever it ends up, it seems to pick a generally spooky or otherwise disconcerting location or object and begins to inhabit that space. Some common examples are churches, old tree stumps, small bodies of water, and abandoned amusement parks. Once it settles on a location, the tendency for stories about said location to be told will increase. Usually there will have been a death in the area too, which helps the whole myth-making process. Rumors pertaining to the newly formed urban legend in the area will spread quickly as more people learn about whatever spooky things supposedly happen there. Eventually, rituals will be imagined by the local populace at large, which are supposed to cause unlikely things to happen. But none of the stuff is actually real. It's all just a side effect of the entity that is SCP-1448 being in the area. But everyone who encounters it will believe it. And that's how a whole lot of urban legends were started apparently. Coming in at number 2, we've got SCP-1179. Currently, this SCP is missing in action. Nobody's seen it since the 60s, but I'm sure someday it will appear again. We might not like it when it does, though. The way it's been described is as a giant, vaguely human figure carved from volcanic rock, but it's not a statue. In fact, some folks say that it is the Norse El Jotun Suitor. You know, the giant guarding the gate of the fire realm, the one that's 30 meters tall, has a beard and horns. Yeah, that one. The thing is, these mythological creatures are well known for their ability to shapeshift as well, which is part of why nobody really knows where it is these days. It can change form, become invisible, and even fly. And any photographic evidence of the monster has been rendered inconclusive, whether thanks to technological malfunction, operator error, or destruction of gear. Although some folks have reported 1179 having hellfire for eyes and stinking of sulfur, so there's that. If I've learned anything from horror movies and reading SCP entries, it's that if a mythological creature doesn't want to be found, you should probably not go looking for it. Even if you do end up locating your target, you're not gonna be too happy with what happens next. Finally, at number 1, we've got SCP-3844. It's a dragon, and a pretty chill one too. At the beginning of the 20th century, a group of explorers came across the dwelling of a giant, flying, fire-breathing reptile. Like many dragons in many different stories, this one can actually communicate with humans. And originally, it was very friendly too. It treated the humans who would visit as friends and even shared drinks and treasure with them. But over time, the Foundation had to amp up their containment procedures to ensure that this anomaly remained hidden. Which at first was okay with the dragon, but not flying was a tough deal. Over time, the dragon grew smaller and felt as though the wonders of the world were being slowly sapped away. As the Foundation supplied it with more reading material and more explanations as to how the world around it functioned, it became less content, especially as it could not experience the world itself in order to keep it hidden away. In the end, the dragon decided that it could not wait around any longer as the world's whimsy disappeared before its very eyes, so it attempted to fly away, resulting in Foundation forces shooting it down. Very tragic. However, a new document has been added to the many files that make up 3844's entry. Apparently there might be more dragons in the mountains, less willing to interact in good faith with the Foundation, but at least there are still some around.
Number 5, SCP-169. SCP-169 is a massive, sentient, and highly aggressive creature that sort of resembles an arthropod with multiple appendages. It has the ability to regenerate any damage inflicted on its body, making it virtually indestructible. Now, its size and strength make it a formidable foe, and its potential for destruction is immeasurable. This entity is incomprehensibly large. We're actually having quite a bit of difficulty measuring it. It spans anywhere from 2,000 to 8,000 meters wide. As such, the nickname Leviathan is sometimes used by less than professional researchers discussing the creature in a comic vein. The entity was first discovered in the early 1900s and has been under close observation and confinement ever since. It is speculated to have originated from the pre-Cambrian era. It's currently housed in a secure facility with multiple layers of containment measures in place to prevent any breaches. Of course, only authorized personnel with the highest clearance level are allowed access to the facility and the entity itself, and normally all of this would be very classified information, but a brief press release has allowed me to share it with you today. SCP-169 is classified as a Euclid level threat, meaning that it requires constant monitoring and attention to prevent any potential threats it may pose. Any attempts to breach containment will be met with the full force of the law, and those responsible will be held accountable for any damages or loss of life that may occur. Now, these containment protocols include things like regular monitoring of behavior, physical health, as well as specialized equipment to help keep it sedated and under control. Now, while the Megalodon at one point in time could have been considered the king of the waters for its era, it's indisputable that in any physical confrontation, SCP-169 would pose a much greater threat. And my viewers, if you're interested in more SCP content, we've actually had several joint operations between Top 5 Scary and the SCP Foundation, and there's lots of ground to cover. But if you're interested in topics other than our beloved Foundation, Top 5 Scary has a lot of that as well, so please, we encourage you to subscribe, even hitting the bell to be notified of future video uploads. But we would humbly request that you do that after this video is completed, as there are more interesting SCPs to listen to. Number 4. SCP-682. This might very well be one of the most renowned items in storage in the Foundation. It's very well known. It's a Euclid-class object manifesting as a massive reptilian creature, measuring approximately 18 meters in length and standing approximately 6 meters tall at the shoulder. Now, SCP has a very tough, scaly hide that, at time of writing, appears to be impervious to almost all forms of physical damage. As such, the containment unit that we store SCP-682 in is perpetually filled with hydrochloric acid in an attempt to slow the entity's regenerative abilities. SCP-682 has shown to be hostile to an unparalleled degree, displaying what we refer to as a profound hatred for all biological life. It's extremely aggressive and displays advanced intelligence, with its intelligence believed to be comparable to a well-educated human, if not greater, and has shown incredible ability to adapt to new situations. It's capable of adjusting its body mass to serve its needs as it consumes and sheds matter. Its regenerative abilities are shown to shrug off and sustain injuries that would otherwise flatline most forms of biological life, making containment rather difficult during the few occasions of breaches that have occurred. Now, containment of SCP-682 is a top priority for the Foundation, as it poses an extreme threat to both personnel and the public, of course, as well. Its containment chamber is located in a specially designed underground facility, which is very heavily fortified and equipped with the latest in containment technology. Some I would love to share with you, but unfortunately am not at liberty to do so. The chamber is monitored round the clock by a team of trained personnel who are equipped with the latest in weapons and protective gear. But things happen, and in the event of a breach, all personnel are to evacuate the facility immediately, and we initiate what is called a level 4 lockdown. All available resources are then deployed to recontain the SCP, including our mobile task forces, and in some cases air support and heavy artillery. We have also been authorized in some events to use nuclear weapons in case all other measures fail. This is, suffice to say, a series of reasons why SCP-682 poses what we would consider a grand threat to a creature like the Megalodon, which it would probably consider insignificant. Number 3. SCP-3000. SCP-3000 is one of the more infamous entities being kept in the Foundation. It's a Keter-class object and represents a dangerous and enigmatic entity threatening the safety of the world at large. This creature manifests as a behemoth-sized sea serpent-like creature that resides in the depths of the Pacific Ocean. Its immense size, strength, and its unknown potential for cataclysmic damage and destruction make it a chief cause of concern for the Foundation, and thusly its containment is one of the utmost important to Foundation members. Now, this entity's exact origin and purpose do remain unknown at time of writing, but current speculation is that this creature is possibly millions of years old and possesses an intelligence far greater in scope than initially observed, vastly surpassing average human intelligences. Now, because of the nature of SCP-3000, containment protocols for this creature do prove to be a bit of a challenge, requiring perpetual monitoring and undivided attention. The area surrounding SCP-3000, currently a region of the sorry, I'm not at liberty to discuss that. Roughly 300 kilometers wide, is routinely patrolled by Foundation vessels. The area is sequestered from all civilian attempting any form of exploration or diving effort. Any individual we reasonably believe has been contacted or affected by SCP-3000 are to be contained at Site-151. Should we have reason to believe that these individuals have been affected by the more anomalous properties of SCP-3000, this quarantine of the individuals will be indefinite, but rest assured, proper care will be taken. SCP-3000 is recorded as a Class 8 cognitohazardous entity, as a direct observation of SCP-3000 has been shown to cause serious mental alterations in subjects. We've experienced individuals who, directly observing SCP-3000, develop inexplicable head pains, paranoia, extreme anxiety, memory loss, and even alteration. There are unsettling traces of evidence to suggest that SCP-3000 is even capable of manipulating the thoughts and desires of subjects who come into contact with it. So, why don't you let us handle it? Number 2. SCP-1128. SCP-1128 is a Euclid-class object, and a particularly unusual one, even by Foundation standards. It's an immense aquatic threat that appears to those who are known of it. The creature is believed to reside in the depths of the ocean, and little is known about its origin or behavior. It was first brought to our attention when a fishing vessel reported an encounter with a strange and terrifying creature in the waters off the coast of, well, I can't say. The fisherman described a large dark shape that appeared to be swimming towards them at an incredible speed. The creature had glowing eyes and sharp teeth and appeared to be intent on attacking the vessel. Now, further investigation would reveal that SCP-1128 is an entity that manifests as a massive aquatic predator, similar to a megalodon. Actually, we suspect that some megalodon sightings might be SCP-1128 sightings. Now, anyone given a full description of this thing's appearance through either spoken or written descriptions or visual descriptions of the being will cause it to appear to you. As such, we will try to keep it vague for you. I wouldn't worry too much. Dr. Bright has reassured me that no threat present should be in this video. Persons infected by SCP-1128's will exhibit no outwardly bizarre behavior, with the exception of an aversion to activities involving water, such as bathing or swimming. Now, fascinatingly, should the subject become fully immersed, the subject will disappear regardless of depth. The subject will then reappear in a vast ocean-like space, a liminal space, where they are pursued by SCP-1128. We have recovered individuals like this before, and interviews with these individuals do carry some risk of infection spreading, as descriptions of the entity do trigger further infection. As such, Foundation members involved in any study and containment of SCP-1128 are provided Class C amnesiacs to cloud their memory of the anomalous properties, so maybe try and forget that last point, just for your own safety. SCP-3008. For our final entry today, I've brought an SCP that most of our researchers do agree to be somewhat humorous. We understand some levity is welcome when discussing unusual topics such as these. SCP-3008 is a Euclid-class object unusually manifesting as an IKEA retail flagship store that seemingly expands fractally ever onwards, with an indefinite, undefined end. It is populated by a series of unknown, vaguely humanoid entities, sometimes referred referred to colloquially as the staff, and internally in our documents as SCP-3008-2. Our current data suggests that the IKEA should be 10 kilometers squared, which is already preposterously large, but laser range finding has led us to reasonably believe the space is infinite. Within SCP-3008, there are an unknown number of civilians who have found themselves trapped within the space. Our studies have revealed to us that, fascinatingly, they formed a rudimentary society, with the seat of their government being the Recliners Department. SCP-3008-2 that I mentioned earlier, the staff, superficially resemble humans, but with exaggerated or incorrect body proportions. They possess no discernible facial features, but are observed they are wearing a yellow shirt and blue trousers consistent with IKEA uniforms. Interestingly, the IKEA store, SCP-3008, appears to have its own independent day and night cycle. During the day, the store exists fairly normally like an IKEA you might visit, but during the night, the humanoids of SCP-3008-2 will become increasingly violent to the human survivors. Now, we have observed more than one exit of the place, meaning containment within is not permanent. However, trouble for us, these exits seem to fluctuate, making escape treacherously random. Since our studies began, 14 individuals have managed to leave, and a few of them have even managed to recuperate and rejoin society, with middling effects. We believe that would the Megalodon be transported to SCP-3008, it would find itself rather overwhelmed with the lack of water, and therefore would not possess a significant threat.